Hello YouTube, Old Tech Fan here. Um, on the bench today we have a Marantz 2220 that we're going to be doing a full restoration on, which is going to include um, electrolytic capacitors throughout the unit, including the two large coupling capacitors, because this is a capacitor coupled amplifier, and the large filter capacitor as well. We're also going to be upgrading several small signal transistors that are known to go noisy over time. Um, and what else? We're going to be doing an LED conversion with the faceplate and dial lamps. We're also going to be doing a few other upgrades as needed, checking some resistors that are known to go out of tolerance, so on and so forth. Make this thing run for another 30 years. So, first things first, we're starting with the amplifier board. And I know a lot of people, when they go into these, they'll take a look at the layout and immediately want to start desoldering, excuse me, the wires that go to the pins on the bottom part of the amplifier board. I want to show you a way that I use, and this works on most receivers, Pioneer, Sansui. I believe it to be the engineers designed these things to be serviced without having to desolder a bunch of wires. So there really is only one wire that needs to be desoldered, and that is a brown wire that goes to the large filter capacitor. And that's just because it's a little bit short and it goes through a hole on the chassis. So let's take a closer look at what we have here. So basically, what I've done is I've taken loose all the brackets that hold this in, which are these brackets right here. Okay, there's one on each side. They're mounted with little screw holes. Pointer. They're mounted to the side right here. There's 4 screws per side, and there's also 2 screws that hold it to the bracket to the chassis. Take those loose. It does take a little finesse. You're gonna have to move this around in order to get your screwdriver on the screws, but it can be done, and it's not too bad. I don't want to flip this thing over to show you the brown wire, but trust me, it's there. It's you'll see it. It's the brown wire that goes to this large filter capacitor right here to the negative side. Just desolder it from the capacitor itself, and that'll give the wire enough slack. Everything else, there's plenty of slack on to do what you need to do. Big thing of note, these diodes right here. These are the heat sensing diodes that control the bias. They're mounted to the heat sink, with a little bracket. In fact, I'll show you what the bracket looks like with these little brackets right here. They're mounted to the heat sink, and that basically, senses how hot the outputs are getting and adjusts the bias accordingly. Now, you need to be really careful with these because these, and they come in different styles. Pioneers use the red ones that have a little keyhole slot, but they're all made the same. They're like 2 diodes in series, I believe, and they're encased in epoxy in this plastic container. And these leads have an uncanny history of breaking off right at the base. Wow, my throat is terrible today. Right at the base here, if you bend them too much. So the idea is to not bend them at all. If you need to move these out of the way, move the leads at the pin versus bending them around the diode itself, because there's enough slack in these wires that if it breaks off at the pin, you can easily restrip it and resolder it. If it breaks off there, game over. So, and good luck finding replacements for them, because they don't exist new. Sometimes you can find them used. There are things you can do, in a pinch with couple of off-the-shelf diodes, but it's not a situation you want to be in. So just be really, really careful with those. So we're going to go ahead and do this amplifier board, and we'll be back. One more thing I want to note. I know a lot of us, myself included, get spoiled when you see the PCB marked like these with capacitor polarity. And 99% of the time it's right, and I've been known myself to just start yanking caps and rely on the polarity markings. But what I can tell you from experience, you can read about it online too, is Marantz a lot of times on various different models. I don't know if this one's included in that or not, but I'm not going to take the chance having the polarities marked incorrect. So anytime you're working on a Marantz, it's a good rule of thumb to note the cap polarity, the way it's installed, and obviously install the new one in the same direction, regardless of the board markings. One last note here. Keep thinking of these things along the way. Sorry about that. I'm not going to get into a capacitor discussion here, about what capacitors sound best or if they even change the sound of an amplifier. But what I will tell you is there are certain properties of a capacitor that when you're doing a recap and a restore, you should try to stick with the same properties. Whichever brand you use is completely up to you. But anytime you see these orange ELNAs here, these are low leakage electrolytics, and they should be replaced with a low leakage type. What brand you use, what series is completely up to you. I like to use the Nishikon KL series, but just wanted to note that anytime you see those orange capacitors there, those orange ELNAs, they should be replaced with a low leakage type, because that's what these are, and the circuit was designed to work that way. Everywhere else in the amplifier, I can tell you what we're going to be doing this one with. We're going to be using ELNA Silmix for most everything other than these orange guys. So that's just, again, that's what I prefer to use. You use whatever you want. Just try to make sure you're using a capacitor with the same electrical properties. Okay, so we've got our amplifier board recapped, and as you can see, there's all the new caps in there. The 4 spots where you see the black capacitors, those are the low leakage ones, and the rest are audio grade capacitors. Now, one thing I will point out, when we go to set the bias or idle current on this amplifier, let me get a flashlight. We will be clipping our leads onto, let's see, come on. That resistor right there, which is R748, and the one on the very end, right there, which is R747, I believe. So we're going to be clipping our meter across those 2 leads and adjusting the corresponding variable resistor to, I believe it's 7.5 millivolts, but I'll have to check the manual. Alright, we're going to finish buttoning this back up. Okay, one other thing I want to mention is that when you're doing a restoration like this, you want to make sure each time you do a section, like the amp section, power supply, preamp, phono stage, you want to test, go ahead and reassemble to the point where you can fire up the receiver and test and make sure you don't have any issues. And that's, just because it's much easier to track down a problem. We all make mistakes. I've made plenty of them. And it's easier to track down a problem if you can isolate it to a certain section or a certain board than it is to do the whole job and end up with a problem and then try to track it down. So just a little bit of advice, and be back after we get this reassembled and tested and move on to our next section. Another point of note, just wanted to bring up, when you reassemble this amplifier and you are going to reassemble these little diodes right here, make sure you put a little bit of heatsink compound on the back of them. That just helps the heat transfer from the heatsink to the diode. Just make sure you're getting the most accurate reading from them you can.